July 1st, 1997, Hong Kong. Midnight. Rain pouring down. You're watching on TV as the British flag comes down after 156 years. Prince Charles is there, the handover ceremony, the end of an empire right there on your screen. But here's what your news anchors didn't explain that night. You weren't just watching a ceremony. You were watching the conclusion of the longest calculated historical reversal in modern history. Because 155 years earlier, 1842, Britain took that same Hong Kong at gunpoint, forced China to hand it over after fighting a war to sell drugs. And from that moment, China started counting, not just years, they were counting every humiliation, every forced treaty, every piece of territory stolen, taking notes on how Britain did it so they could reverse it. You watched the entire transformation with your own eyes. When you were young, Britain-ruled Hong Kong and China was broken. By the time you were in your 60s, Britain was handing it back and China was dictating terms. That wasn't luck, that was strategy. And the reversal didn't stop in 1997. Let me show you how China played the longest game in modern geopolitics. Start in 1839, the Opium Wars. Britain had a problem. They were obsessed with Chinese tea, but China didn't want anything Britain made. So British merchants came up with a solution that was brilliant and evil in equal measure. They'd grow opium in India, smuggle it into China, create millions of addicts, and use drug profits to pay for tea. And it worked perfectly. By 1838, estimates range from 4 to 12 million Chinese opium addicts. That's more than the entire population of London, Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool combined at the time. These weren't statistics. These were fathers who couldn't work, mothers selling possessions for one more pipe, entire villages destroyed so British traders could balance their books. When China tried to stop it, burning British opium shipments in 1839, Britain declared war. They called it defending free trade. The Chinese call it what it was: state-sponsored drug dealing backed by gunboats. Britain won, easily, and in 1842 they dictated terms. The Treaty of Nanking, still preserved in British archives, forced China to pay $21 million in silver, open 5 ports to British control, and hand over a rocky island called Hong Kong, in perpetuity. Forever. That's the word they used. Forever. China signed at gunpoint. But here's the thing. While British diplomats celebrated in Hong Kong's new colonial buildings, Chinese officials were writing everything down. The date, the terms, the humiliation. They were already thinking about reversal. But they knew it would take generations. Then it got worse. 1860, the Second Opium War. British and French troops marched into Beijing. Your generation might remember this was commemorated in that film, The Last Emperor, and they did something that still haunts Chinese memory. The old summer palace, Yuanmingyuan, picture Versailles crossed with the British Museum, filled with 3,000 years of Chinese treasures. Silk scrolls, jade carvings, gold artifacts, priceless historical records. British soldiers spent 3 days looting it. Then Lord Elgin, the British commander, ordered it burned. 3 days of flames, complete destruction. Victor Hugo, the French writer, called it one of the 2 bandits of Europe destroying civilization. He wasn't wrong. Contemporary accounts describe British officers wearing stolen Chinese imperial robes as jokes. Priceless artifacts smashed because they were too heavy to carry. Historical records, irreplaceable documents, used to start campfires, And Britain demanded more payment, 8 million taels in silver. China paid, again, and recorded it. But Britain wasn't done. Neither were the other powers watching Britain get rich from China. Fast forward to 1900, the Boxer Rebellion. 8 nations invaded China: Britain, France, US, Germany, Russia, Japan, Italy, Austria-Hungary. They marched into Beijing, occupied the Forbidden City, and carved the country into spheres of influence. The Boxer Protocol of 1901, check the historical records, demanded 450 million taels. That's over 1,300% of China's annual revenue. Imagine someone demanding 13 years of your entire income in one payment. China couldn't pay it immediately, so Britain and the others structured it as a 39-year debt with interest. China would be paying for its own invasion until 1940. By 1949, when Mao declared the People's Republic, China had signed 23 major unequal treaties, lost territory, lost sovereignty, lost face. The century of humiliation. But something interesting happened during those 110 years. While China was weakening, Britain started declining too. World War I drained British resources. World War II shattered the empire. By 1947, Britain was granting independence to India, the jewel of the empire. The sun was finally setting on British power. And China was watching, learning, taking notes on how empires fall. When Nixon went to China in 1972, you probably watched it on TV. Western leaders thought they were bringing China into the modern world. But here's what Nixon didn't know. China was studying America and Britain, figuring out how Western power worked so they could build their own version. That wasn't diplomacy. That was reconnaissance. Deng Xiaoping came to power in 1978 with a plan: economic reform, modernization. But never, never forget what the West did. Use economic power to reverse the power dynamic. And he had a specific target in mind: Hong Kong. The lease Britain had on parts of Hong Kong would expire in 1997. Deng saw an opportunity, not just to reclaim territory, to reverse the humiliation, to make Britain hand back what they stole, on China's terms. September 1982, Margaret Thatcher flies to Beijing, fresh off her Falklands War victory. The Iron Lady, riding high. She's there to negotiate Hong Kong's future. She wants to extend British control, maybe keep sovereignty. At minimum, let Britain administer Hong Kong after 1997. Deng Xiaoping listens. Then he says something that reportedly made Thatcher go pale. I could walk in and take Hong Kong this afternoon. He wasn't bluffing. China's military could overrun Hong Kong in hours. Britain knew it. Deng knew Britain knew it. But here's what's brilliant. Deng didn't need to invade. He had a better weapon: economics. By 1982, Hong Kong's water came from China. Its food came from China. Its economic growth depended on Chinese trade. Britain couldn't hold Hong Kong without Chinese cooperation. The power dynamic had already shifted. Britain just hadn't accepted it yet. Contemporary accounts say Thatcher left that meeting shaken. Photographs show her stumbling on the steps outside the Great Hall of the People. She claimed she tripped. Chinese officials smiled. The symbolism was perfect. Britain stumbling while leaving China. The negotiations dragged on for 2 years. Britain tried to maintain some control. Deng refused. Finally, 1984, Britain signed the Sino-British Joint Declaration. Hong Kong would return to China in 1997. Complete sovereignty. Britain would leave. No exceptions. China had reversed the Treaty of Nanking, peacefully, through economic leverage and patience. The countdown began. July 1st, 1997. You watched it happen. The ceremony at midnight, rain pouring, Prince Charles reading a farewell, the British flag coming down, the Chinese flag rising. Chris Patten, the last British governor, sailing away on the royal yacht Britannia, as God Save the Queen played. The end of 156 years of British rule. But here's what made it different from other decolonizations. China wasn't asking for independence. China was taking back what was stolen, on their terms, in their way, with the whole world watching on television. You witnessed the moment, but did you realize what it meant? This wasn't just Hong Kong coming home. This was China announcing the century of humiliation is over. The roles have reversed. We're powerful again, and we remember everything. But here's where it gets really interesting. The reversal didn't stop in 1997. Look at Britain and China today. In 2015, Xi Jinping visited London. The British government rolled out the red carpet, literally, state banquet at Buckingham Palace. Prime Minister David Cameron escorting him everywhere. Why? Because Britain needed Chinese investment. Chinese companies bought British infrastructure, stake in nuclear power plants, control of the port of Felixstowe, development projects across London. The roles flipped completely. Remember, in 1842, Britain controlled Chinese ports. In 2015, Chinese companies control British ports. When Britain voted for Brexit in 2016, who did they immediately try to court? China. Desperate for trade deals to replace European access, the former colonial master now needing its former victim. Walk through London today. Chinese tourists fill the luxury shops. Chinese investors own landmark buildings. Mandarin language signs appear in shopping districts. The economic power dynamic reversed entirely. And it's not just economic, it's diplomatic. When Britain criticizes China on human rights, Hong Kong protests, Xinjiang, anything, China doesn't apologize or explain. They threaten economic consequences. They remind Britain of colonial history. They tell Britain to stay out of Chinese affairs. And Britain backs down. Every time. The power gap is that clear. World Bank data shows China's GDP went from $191 billion in 1980 to over $17 trillion today. That's a 90x increase in one generation. Britain's economy? About $3 trillion. China's economy is now 6 times larger than Britain's. The country that couldn't defend itself against British gunboats in 1842 is now 6 times more economically powerful than Britain. That's not just recovery, that's reversal. You've watched this entire transformation with your own eyes. You remember when Made in China was a joke and Hong Kong was British. You watched Nixon's historic handshake thinking America was winning. You saw Tiananmen and thought the Communist Party would fall. You witnessed the Hong Kong handover wondering if China could really manage it. 70 years, that's all it took. From 1949 to now, China went from broken victim to economic superpower. From signing unequal treaties to dictating terms to Britain. This isn't ancient history. This is why China acts the way it does today. This is why they're sensitive about sovereignty. This is why they build their military. This is why they remember every colonial crime. When you understand the humiliation, you understand the determination. So here's what your government won't say. The British Empire extracted wealth from China for a century through violence and drugs. China reversed it in a generation through patience and economics. Britain took Hong Kong at gunpoint in 1842. 155 years later, China reclaimed it through economic strength and strategic weighting. The power dynamic didn't just shift, it reversed completely. When you watched that handover ceremony in 1997, with the rain and the flags and the end of empire, you were watching something deeper than decolonization. You were watching the conclusion of a 155-year plan. China counted every year, every treaty, every humiliation. And then they made Britain hand it back while the whole world watched. The roles haven't just reversed, they've flipped entirely. Britain needed China's markets. Britain needs Chinese investment. Britain needs Chinese cooperation. The country that once controlled a quarter of the world now needs good relations with the country they once drugged and invaded. That's not just irony. That's historical justice delivered through economics and patience. The only question left, what comes next in this reversal?